Welcome to Stealing from Wizards Volume 1, Pickpocketing, by R.A. Consul, read by the author. Chapter 14, Mr. Flint. Kuro dashed back to Autumn Lodge as fast as his feet would let him. He'd have sprinted the full distance, but his legs kept insisting on skipping gleefully instead of running, which slowed him down. The delight at actual success made him giddy all over. He reached the dining hall just as everyone was clearing out from dinner. He spotted Charlie amongst the swarm and fought through the surge of students towards her. He scampered up to her and began to tell her all he'd learned from that day, forgetting all about their plans to pretend to be enemies. He'd barely gotten 3 words out when something grabbed him by the collar and hauled him backwards. "Thinking of skipping detention, are you?" said a nasal and malicious voice. Kuro craned his neck to identify his assailant. The man looked prematurely old. His hair sat unevenly, brushed up from one side in a poor attempt to hide his balding head. His face was creased with lines from permanently scowling eyes and sneering lips. He wore glasses low on his nose so he could gaze disdainfully over them at students. It was Mr. Flint, the vice principal. Kuro hadn't yet had the displeasure of meeting McCutcheon's lackey, but he had heard of him. If McCutcheon was the judge of Avalon Junior High, Flint was the executioner. By all reports, he reveled in his duty to punish the students, and his familiar, a sneaky little ferret, was constantly on the prowl looking for children putting a foot out of line. "You're mine tonight, boy." Flint's face twisted into an approximation of a grin. Kuro's heart sank. It was the first Tuesday of November. He had detention. All of the delight at finally casting a spell eroded under Flint's twitching scowl. He slumped and allowed himself to be led off by the vice principal. Flint led Kuro all the way back to the school and up to the 4th floor where the alchemy laboratories were held. He shoved open the door of one of the rooms and pushed Kuro inside. Something had gone terribly wrong in that room. The class normally smelled of dubious concoctions, but tonight it stank like rotting manticore entrails and moldering socks. Kuro was slightly glad that he had missed dinner, as there was nothing in his stomach to expel. Bluish-black ooze dripped from the walls. It covered the desks. It soaked the books and bags which had been abandoned by the class in which the pungent catastrophe had happened. "Explosion in a 3rd-year class," said Flint in a sadistically gleeful tone. "Clean it up. No magic." He shoved a bucket of soapy water and a sponge over to Kuro before fleeing the stinking room. He left his ferret to stand guard and ensure Kuro did his duty, though the conjured creature couldn't bear the smell either and watched from the hallway. Kuro started to scrub. He started at the edge of the class and worked inward, climbing on shelves and hanging from beams to get the many splashes of putrid goop. The bucket must have been enchanted, for no matter how many times he rinsed his sponge, the water stayed clear and clean. He worked slowly towards the epicenter of the explosion. A split and mangled silver beaker sitting on a desk in the 3rd row. It was tiring work, but not nearly as bad as he had expected. He wasn't being whipped or tortured, and he was allowed to swing from the rafters and climb on desks. If it hadn't been for the smell, he might have even enjoyed himself. It was nearly midnight by the time Flint was satisfied with his work. "That'll teach you for stealing, boy," he said menacingly. "Count yourself lucky. In the old days, they'd have had you caned and expelled." He licked his teeth as though he longed for the opportunity. "Oh, that's more like what I was expecting," said Kuro. "This wasn't really that bad." Kuro realized as soon as the words had left his mouth that it had been a foolish thing to say. "Not that bad, eh?" Flint's eyes narrowed. "Well, I'll be seeing you again on Thursday, won't I? We'll see if I can find something more appropriate to your crimes. Now, get to bed." He shot one last haunting glare at Kuro and vanished down the darkened hallway. Kuro began making his way through the empty school. It was very different at night. The halls were dark, and even his nearly silent steps seemed to echo loudly through them. It felt more like home, in detritus, quiet, and full of secrets. He knew that he should head back straight away. He was tired and hungry, and if he was caught out and about, he risked more detentions. But he couldn't help the urge to wander freely without the weight of suspicion from the other students pulling him down. He found a staircase he'd never taken and climbed it until he reached the roof. He breathed in the cool spring air, heavy with the smells of fresh blossoms and the sounds of cheerful frogs singing. He sat on the edge of the building and dangled his feet over the high wall. He looked up at the silhouette of the high school up on the plateau with a nearly full moon glowing behind it. The freedom of the night was intoxicating. Kuro leapt from the wall and landed like a cat on the soft grass. He strolled casually back to Autumn Lodge, enjoying the peace and solitude. The island was a different world at night. The huge moon bathed it in cool blue light. Glowbugs danced with each other in the grass. Pixies left glittering trails as they flitted between flowers, drinking the nectar and collecting berries. Thorny quill blossom bushes, normally a barricade of needles, opened their delicate white blossoms which glowed brightly in the moonlight. The air warmed as he moved to the summer quarter, and the songs of frogs shifted to the rhythmic buzz of cicadas. The air grew heavy and humid, but the normally oppressive heat of the quarter was broken by a gentle, cool breeze. Kuro was startled by movements in the woods. They were still and quiet in the day, but had come alive at night. Eel vines, docile and lazy in the sun, shifted and slithered along branches as they vied for better basking locations. A family of skunks wandered past, waddling with confidence and barely giving Kuro a second glance. Larger things moved deeper in the woods, too, but Kuro thought better of investigating. Charlie would judge him harshly for his lack of curiosity, but if a single one of her stories were true, he did not want to meet what roamed in the woods at night. Autumn Quarter was different again, but unlike the other two, it was quiet. The only sounds were of rustling leaves. If anything were alive in the autumn night, they were much better at keeping it hidden than in the warmer quarters. The chill air cut through Kuro's uniform, and he hurried to the lodge. He crept into the lounge, trying not to disturb anyone. There were a couple of high school students exchanging affections in a dark corner, and a senior asleep amongst a pile of textbooks and paper, pen still in hand. Kuro shook the worst of the leaves and dirt from his clothes into a low-burning fire and climbed behind a couch. He had been sleeping there for the past few weeks since being exiled from the dorms by the other boys for fear of him stealing their things. He couldn't complain too much, though. The fire was warm and the cushions soft. It was still better than his old bed in detritus. He woke early and starving. He sat alone at breakfast, gorging himself on split pea waffles and watching Charlie and the others from afar. Kuro desperately wanted to talk to his friends, but couldn't find an opportunity. People or their familiars always seemed to be around, and his friends were doing a good job of keeping up the ruse of being enemies. It would be the weekend before another of their planned meetings, and Kuro had to keep all of his news bottled up for days. He also had another detention before then. This time, he made sure to show up with a full stomach. He faced Flint on the steps of the school with steely resolve, ready for whatever misery he could dish out.
"Last time was too easy for you, eh?"
Flint sneered. He carried a pair of thick, rubbery gas masks and a large canister with a pump on the top. There was a long hose attached to it, with what looked like a shower head at the end.
"Not a proper punishment, was it? Well, let's see how you feel about dragon fae. There's an infestation of them in the Vertime greenhouse, and—"
"Dragon fae?" Kuro interrupted. "Oh, no problem. 1 minute." He ran into the schoolhouse, despite Flint cursing after him to stay put. He returned minutes later, hauling a large empty cage and a bag of sweets from Ms. Crawley's desk.
"What's that?"
Flint demanded. "It's a cage," explained Kuro. "Don't worry, I left a note." Flint was not at all happy with Kuro's eagerness, but he didn't seem to know what to do with a student that walked willingly to their detention. He just sneered and muttered to his ferret about the falling standards of the school. He led Kuro out to the greenhouse in the winter quarter. Caution Dragon Fae, no entry sign had been added to the door since the last time Kuro had visited.
"A couple of elves had to go to the nurse last night after they disturbed the nest."
Flint looked eager to throw Kuro into the greenhouse and leave him to be devoured.
"We're to clear them out."
He handed Kuro a gas mask and shoved the spray canister over to him before pulling on a mask of his own and drawing an amber rod with a wooden handle.
You spray the plants with pesticide and I'll deal with the flying ones.
He illustrated his intention by launching a crackling shower of electric arcs from the tip of his rod. Crow looked at the canister and rod uncertainly. Do we have to kill them? He asked, already feeling bad enough for having grieved the one so badly with his magic.
What else do you do with pests?
Demanded the vice principal, his harsh, nasal voice muffled by the mask. You put them in cages, answered Crow, and feed them well enough to keep them from causing trouble. Mr. Flint had no response and could do nothing but watch as Crow abandoned the pesticide and pushed inside the greenhouse, armed only with his cage and candies. The Dragon Fae were not hard to find. The greenhouse was absolutely buzzing with them. They were everywhere, flitting about, tearing leaves from holly trees, making a mess of snow blossom bushes, and devastating the poinsettias in their hunt for prey. Flint charged his rod. Electric sparks arced from it, ready to shock anything that dared enter his space, likely to its demise. Kuro ignored the violent man, and instead made a pile of unwrapped toffees in the cage. One Dragon Fae took offense to the trespassing of humans into their domain and buzzed towards them, screeching and gnashing its teeth. Kuro did his best to stay calm. His plan seemed quite reasonable before he was actually facing an uncaged and angry monster. He started to wave his hands as he'd been taught, and to sing the single word. He felt the connection and the idea of hunger following his palms through their path. With growing confidence, he sang out, "Grother," as he pushed his hands forward. The Dragon Fae crashed into the wave of blue mist that washed forward from Kuro's hands, and it started to buzz manically in circles, its territorial zeal forgotten and replaced with frantic hunger. Kuro approached it and offered a toffee. It attacked the little brown ball with ferocious glee, its teeth and claws quickly becoming stuck in the surface. Kuro picked up the incapacitated creature and gently placed it in the cage. Flint gave a dissatisfied snort, but did not interfere as Kuro continued to ensorcel and bait the Dragon Fae into the cage. Half an hour later, Kuro was confident that he'd caught all of them. Together, Kuro and Flint cautiously pulled the large leafy nest from its hiding place in a holly tree and tossed it into the snow outside. There was almost a glimmer of approval in Flint's eyes as he finally removed the unnecessary gas mask, but it vanished as Kuro began the motions to cast again. Kuro had spotted a huge Dragon Fae, more than twice the size of the others and with an extra pair of wings and a bloated abdomen. It was creeping down the roof of the greenhouse towards them, crawling on its 6 limbs. It was right behind Mr. Flint.
"Attack me, will you, boy?"
Flint yelled, his whiny voice cracking as he ducked away from the puff of mist from Kuro's spell.
"Think a wizardling like you could best me?"
The tip of his lightning rod began sparking violently.
"Time to get what you really deserve."
The Dragon Fae leaped straight through the cloud, but instead of searching for food, it became even more enraged and dove straight for Flint's back, fangs bared. Flint, meanwhile, had charged his lightning rod, and a bolt of lightning split the air, narrowly missing Kuro as he dove out of the path of the arc. Launching himself forward and placing himself between the Dragon Fae and the vice principal, he cast the only evocation he could in the moment that might buy him some time. He focused his thoughts and tried to lift a leaf in front of him, and the evocation misfired as it always did. The air between them exploded. A burst of wind knocked Flint sprawling onto his hands and knees, while Kuro and the Dragon Fae Queen were sent crashing into the greenhouse wall. Flint rolled to reclaim his rod and growled at his familiar to attack. Kuro ignored him, instead scrambling to find the calm needed to cast a spell. If hunger wouldn't distract the Queen, he would need something stronger. He stood shakily and let himself remember the horror of laughter. Neither the Dragon Fae Queen nor Flint was so patient as to give Kuro time to find his focus. Flint chased Kuro around the greenhouse, peppering the garden with bolts of lightning, singeing plants and leaving charred craters in trees. The Queen, now both angry and ravenous, chased Flint, half slithering, half galloping along the ground. The creature was intercepted by an unexpected ally. Flint's ferret, apparently more observant than Flint himself, shot past Kuro and attacked the Dragon Fae. They tangled into a ball of claws, fangs, scales, and fur as they tore into each other. Flint, unable to see the raging battle through the flower beds, shouted at his familiar,
Sigmund, what do you think you are?
Flint's words caught in his throat as his familiars was torn out by the vicious dragon fae queen. The conjured ferret burst into a puff of spiritual smoke that returned to its creator, bringing all of the experiences of the familiar back with it. Flint's momentary shock at the sudden flood of new memories was enough for Kuro to take a shot. The slavering dragon fae queen took to the wing and leaped for the throat of the dazed Mr. Flint. Kuro pointed at the giant dragon fae, let the horror of his master's laughter flow through him, and said, "Lot here." The queen crumpled mid-flight. She thumped harmlessly off Flint and fell, sobbing, to the soil. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.